So thanks so much for letting us come to these amazing offices. I wonder whether it'd be worth just having a couple of minutes for the viewers, just to understand who you are, what your job is, and what a typical day looks like.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Simon Morris. I'm Vice President of International Marketing at Adobe, which basically means everything outside the US from a marketing perspective. Within our global marketing organization reports up to myself. So I've got teams around the world who are thinking about their customers in their market I've been at Adobe for like 14 years. So I joined actually just shortly after Adobe acquired Omniture and made their move into the kind of digital marketing space or the analytics space, and kind of raised a few eyebrows. I joined it around then, and I've been with the company ever since, and on that kind of constant transformational journey that the company's been on, which has been amazing to be part of.
I can't imagine the things that have changed over 14 years. It's really, really wild. When you came into the room, we ended up bonding over football, because this is just like, something that is close to my heart and is yours as well. And something that's happened at Adobe recently over the past few years is your sponsorship of the FA Cup. I use the word sponsorship, but I know that it goes a lot deeper than that as well. And because I think that's something that lights us both up, I'd love to start off there. So from your perspective, and this is a selfish perspective, probably from the Adobe side of things, what were you hoping to get out of the partnership with the FA Cup, the Women's FA Cup?
We start in an area that's a good place for me to start, because it obviously brings together, like you say, two of my passion points of like football and creativity. I think if I take a step back, we think about like partnerships more kind of broadly. We're always thinking about like, how do we connect with our customers in passion points they care about. So we've done a lot of work over the years in the kind of music and fashion and art sort of space, and still do. And I'd say probably more recently we've kind of looked more at like sports, because there are just so many. It's very emotional. There are so many incredible stories, and I think particularly in the women's game, so many of those stories often don't get a chance to be told. When we sat down with the Football Association, and we kind of learnt about their ambitions for where they want to take the competition. And they, I think, saw an opportunity with Adobe, who had that kind of marketing expertise, obviously the creative tools to help tell some of those stories. It was kind of like a partnership that, kind of right time, right place. It really came together at an opportune moment. We were looking to ensure that our brand was seen as being relevant and approachable for the kind of younger audiences. And we know that the women's game attracts a very young, diverse audience, very sort of family-friendly, family-oriented, we just love the idea of being able to work with the clubs and the players and the fans to tell stories and bring those stories to life, which have been done for the last couple of years, and I think one of the most rewarding moments for us, and for me personally actually, was for Adobe to get recognised a couple of weeks ago at the Women's Football Awards for Brand of the Year for the work we've done.
Do you have an award with you by any chance? Oh, look at that!
Not that I don't keep it very close to hand, but yes, there we go. It was just really nice to get that recognition for the work we've been doing, we actually spent time talking to, I think there's over 500 clubs enter the competition in the first qualifying rounds. Something like 70 or 80% of them are amateur clubs. And when we spoke to them, we found out that the biggest challenges they have when it comes to kind of creating content is they haven't got the finances, they haven't got the resources, they haven't got the skills. We felt that we could help them with all those elements, and because there was a desire there to get kind of trained on the technology that could help them create content. And so we've got over about 140 clubs now using Adobe Express, which is our kind of quick and easy tool to create any type of content. They're using that now to create like consistent brand content for their social content, their match day programs, showcase their training days, and it's just great to see those clubs now empowered to create great content quickly, as opposed to what was happening was you might have their, in the case of Luton Town Ladies, their captain was also their social media person, and she was like having to schedule, put posts out whilst running out on the pitch. Now they can kind of schedule content using Adobe Express, and it's just enabling those clubs to create standout content, promote their stories.
It's so cool. Like when you think about like the stuff that is really interesting to a sports fan. So I'm not a football fan, but I know that like I follow a lot of mountain bikers and cyclists, and the behind the scenes stuff is almost more sort of desirable to see than the races themselves, because you want to see how they get there. And I think, having the tools to be able to go, actually, this is what we're doing on a Wednesday, a Wednesday morning in our training or whenever it is. Like, I think for a fan must be absolutely fascinating and really real as well.
Yeah, it's, we've spoken about the Women's FA Cup partnership, and it's obviously we're also working with the likes of like Real Madrid on their fan engagement strategy, because I think all clubs, no matter, or sports brands, no matter how big, or small they are thinking about how do we drive fan engagement. The more engaged their fans are, the more likely they are to spend money with them and be a loyal kind of fan for years. So they're all thinking about how do they engage their fans, not just the ones that come to the event or come to the stadium. The vast majority of fans will be, in case of Real Madrid, all around the world. How do they produce the right type of content that's relevant, that's in local language, that reaches them on the right platforms? That's where Adobe comes in to help them, bringing together sort of creativity and marketing, and obviously now AI to help produce that fan engagement at scale and personalized experiences at scale.
We were talking this morning about the again going back to that creativity being the golden thread throughout all your audience. Is that one of the reasons you chose football? Because it's like a global like love language. It's something that I watched the three of you walk in and go football. And for a lot of people, football, you can travel all over the world. And we were in Tanzania a few years ago, and somebody was like, Manchester United, and it was just like, sadly not, but it's like, is that one of the reasons football was chosen? The FA was chosen because it connects people globally, or was that?
Yeah, so I think that sport is one of the last remaining things that people actually gather together to watch live. Yeah. In terms of like the way they consume content nowadays. Like, it's one of the few remaining things that people will gather to watch the live game. So just in terms of reaching audiences, it's almost unparalleled, I would say. But I think particularly like in the UK, obviously we were thinking about like some of the challenges we had in the UK. We felt that like sport and football and the women's game and the prestigiousness of the competition of the FA Cup gave us an opportunity to reach communities across the country. Because as I said, all the clubs across the country enter the competition. So you've got reach across the country. You've got incredible stories to share. Like, we know that there are just incredible stories across every single club in the country, whether it be player stories or the club stories, fan stories. They're just amazing, amazing stories. I remember at the final a couple of weeks ago, there was a Manchester United fan. I think she was like 14 years old, and she was basically talking about how she was like her grandmother had played for Manchester United Ladies, and like she was wearing like the skirt that her grandma, like just amazing stories that across the game. And we believe that we can share that. If we can share those stories, and you will inspire more women and girls in sport. And I think the work we've done with the FA over the last year and a half, I think I'd like to believe that's part of the reason that's led to the bigger broadcast deal for the competition. I think something like 19 games are going to be shown in the Adobe Women's FA Cup next season, compared to like 2 or 3 this season, which is amazing. Like more exposure, more stories to share, and we'll see the game continue to grow.
It's so fabulous. I think it strikes me first of all that the nature and the spirit behind what you've created together feels like the truest nature of what a partnership should be. It feels like a win-win. You get an exposure, you're doing the branding thing, you are doing the marketing thing, of course you are, but by the same token, they're benefiting in such a meaningful way. It can have such an impact. That's really quite something. And this is something I've observed really, and I feel quite pleased to be able to speak about this to our community. So last night I was speaking at one of your creator events, and I just had a real sense that the community team, but also Adobe at large, were actually trying to celebrate folks who were creating. And you're walking between 2 worlds with the AI stuff. You are both a creator of the AI, but you put me on the stage, and the 2 people sat next to me were also creators, folks who were there as ambassadors and saying this is cool. And for you to do that, to engage with a partnership such as the FA Cup stuff and sort of say, we're going to elevate you, I think is so powerful. So it's
I think you spoke about like community. I think there are different types of communities depending on the audiences, but certainly for our like creative professionals, that we've always had a big focus on the creator, and the creator's been at the heart of Adobe, and we work, have and have done for years, super closely with our creative community to help, build our products, give us feedback on the beta with the betas, and running community events, and really like you said about yesterday, like showcasing the creator, putting them at the heart of what we do, and that's something that's really important for us and has been since our formation over 40 years ago, and the values and the mission and that principle has been true ever since.
I love that. I love that you referenced a 40-year-old brand, because we have a question about that. James, I don't know whether.
Well, I mean, it's 40 years, but you're number 1 as well. Like, how do you keep relevant? How do you keep that pace of change going? Because it's all very well kind of getting to the spot at number 1 and going, we've got this thing, but you can't rest on your laurels and just keep the product the same. How do you keep evolving for sort of the next generation of creators?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that firstly, I guess going back to the point that I just made, like having making sure that your customer or the creator is front and center is really what's kept us at the forefront of the industry, and that's making sure that we're listening to our customers, we're hearing their feedback, but also looking around the corner, like what do we see is coming next? How do we equip our customers? And they can range from individual creators to students to the largest enterprises, small businesses. There's a whole wide range of audiences that we are part of our different communities and are using our tools, but really looking around the corner and helping them make sure they're future-proofed in terms of their businesses or the way they use our tools. So but yeah, really it starts out by putting the customer front and center, and then making sure that we have constantly innovating our products and thinking about how our products evolve to meet the changing demands and environments around us. We've seen obviously social and mobile and explode, and the next generation of creator wants to use these tools in a different way to somebody who might have been using them for 30, 40, 50 years. So we have to adapt to that and make sure we're providing those solutions and introduce new tools so we can reach more and more audiences. I mentioned Adobe Express. That's a free tool for any creator or anyone who wants to create visual communication to use, and that opens up the Adobe franchise to a much wider range of audiences.
It was so funny last night because we were sat there and I felt very old in the audience because there were a lot of creators there, and what was striking was that we sat there on stage and we looked out into the audience, and there was probably 250 people in the audience there that night, and there was like 150 phones being pointed at us. And as a conference dynamic, as a creator dynamic, that was something that, you know, is clearly part of the new generation of how people are creating. You know, they are sitting there like that, which is, it was in the spirit of your answer, you know, listening, but also watching, you know, just watching these folks having this experience is really quite something. So
Is that something that you see? So we were chatting this morning about the sort of global challenge that you have. So for us, we've got largely people in the UK, but we've got them all over the world. But the thing that connects them is their marketers. So it's actually quite easy from a demographic point of view to go, we can help marketers learn, we can help them connect, and we can help them build confidence. Fairly simple. I was thinking about Adobe, and I'm like, well, you could be anyone. You could almost be anyone. Probably the thing that connects them is creativity. So how do you go about connecting? You know, you've got an audience last night who are, you know, creating content in a certain way, but you could have wildly different audiences in different parts of the world. And like, how do you get your campaigns to work at that level? I find it fascinating that you can even do, like, I can't even get my head around how you'd start.
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're right. You speak to some people and they will have a certain perception of what Adobe does, and you'll speak to somebody else who will think about Adobe in a completely different, you know, light. So it's, you know, how do we make sure that our brand, people truly understand the full spectrum of what Adobe offers to you as an individual, as a business, as a student, as a small business, and you know, that's a constant challenge we have, and that's how and making sure we adapt it to the different markets. That's something that we are constantly thinking about, how we tell that kind of one Adobe kind of story, and it's really around like creativity and marketing and AI, and bringing that together. And I think people would have seen some of that show up at some of our big events like the Adobe Summit or Adobe Max, but really telling that, you know, recognizing that people can, whether they have a creative need or a productivity need or a marketing need, Adobe can provide them with a solution. To the point around, like, I would say your point around, like, you might have marketers in many different countries, but ultimately they are marketers. I think the way that I look at it, in terms of the evolution, we know how much has changed, but you know, I think it was Sir John Hegarty who said, principles remain, practices change. And I think I really believe in that 100%. Like, the same principles from like 40, 50 years ago, they remain. You need to know as a brand, like, who you are, what do you stand for, what are your values, and then how you go to market will evolve. So, you know, people used to talk about the customer as king. Now maybe it's like the community is king, and you know, market research used to be, you know, a very long process. You'd put a survey out there, 2 months later you get the result. Like, you can't. The world moves too quickly than that. You have to be using, you know, constantly testing and learning. And so I think, just thinking about how you evolve your practices is how you stay competitive and stay ahead.
Love that. We actually interviewed Sir John last year, and he was a very nice chap. So he was great. He was very
as
friendly.
you'd expect.
Yeah, absolutely. In the spirit of the question around the globalization, so we've spoken about from a marketing perspective, but your remit is huge in terms of teams as well. So how do you know, it might be a quite similar answer. I'd be really curious. Like, how do you create that culture when you're managing teams literally across the world and sort of maintaining the creativity in your people at Adobe and sort of from a leadership perspective?
That's a great question. I think that, you know, we're constantly thinking about how do we get that global scale but local relevance, and it's a constant kind of challenge. From a technology perspective, you know, unlike other brands that are out there, we have no choice around what tech we use. We get to truly be customer zero. We talk about being customer zero or drinking our own champagne. So we're using the Adobe Experience platform. We're using all of our creative tools, and it's actually great because we get to be, we get to give feedback direct to the product teams about what are some of the business challenges that we're trying to solve as a marketing organization, and they can then help us build products to solve those challenges. So we have obviously a standard MarTech platform that gives us some of that scale and address some of the challenges that we're faced with, the industry's faced with, like how do you produce content at scale? We all know that there's this explosion of content, and if you want to deliver personalized experiences, the amount of content that needs to be produced to deliver those experiences is astronomical. So how do you create that content at scale? And we're rolling out solutions that do that. I'm happy to talk more about that. But we also recognise that we have to show up in the locally relevant way in the different markets around the world, and how we show up in India versus Brazil versus Germany or Korea, it's going to be different. It's going to be different, and so we try and ensure that that people see something from Adobe, they know it's from Adobe no matter where they are in the world. We kind of provide those sort of frameworks. But then allow the local teams to bring in their kind of culturally relevant messaging or partnerships, or working with the right types of influencers that resonate in those local markets, respecting local culture and tone and humour and things that if you're trying to do your marketing from the US, you're never going to get. You have to rely on the local teams to know what's going to resonate, and not just localize your content, but really make sure it's like we call it trans-created, but so it's really in the right kind of tone and language that will appeal to those local audiences.
So it's sort of trust, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way you're going to get that trust is if you have that. Your brand is showing up in a credible way in those local markets, and people will see straight through you if you don't. It has to be consistent.
I think one of the things that, and this is the first time we've met, Simon, so but we've sat here and done our research and done so many YouTube, interviews and watching you, and one of the things that comes across in your character is humility and honesty, and the fact that we've been speaking about trust in your team. And again, just with your leadership style, I think there'll be a lot of folks who would look to someone like you, and certainly within our community, be interested in how you think about leadership. The way that we've chosen to write our questions is definitely thinking about making mistakes and how you choose to sort of address that, because you've spoken about trusting your local teams. But I'd love your reflections on how you choose to lead your teams, because you're an interesting person in that way.
Yeah, I think that, so for me, introducing a culture of positivity, optimism and trust is really important. And I think if you have that kind of environment, then people are more likely to have less fear and think more about the possibilities. I always talk about failing forward. So it's fine. I'm expecting people to make mistakes, because if they're not making mistakes, they're not being bold enough, they're not being ambitious enough. And people will make mistakes, but as long as they learn from them and don't make them again, and also share those learnings with other parts of the business, other teams. So again, you don't have to repeat the same mistakes. So yeah, really failing forward is super important to me. And then I think you have to it's very easy to talk the talk for leaders. Ultimately, it's what you do when you come to the office or you show up is ultimately the tone that's set for the organisation. So I believe in I think actually right from the CEO downwards, open communication, sharing of information, is really important. I think the more that you can democratize data and information, the better decisions we made across the business. So yeah, I think that spirit of like optimism and positivity is really important. And I think it was, God, who was it? I think it was Clive Woodward who spoke about like that 1%. It might not have been him.
Dave Brailsford.
That's the one. Yes. Yeah. He was telling the story actually. But yeah, that's like, can you find even if something has gone like incredibly well, like there's always that 1% that you can find to make it better next time. So like really encouraging people to celebrate success. That's really important. But also think about like how could we improve it even that fraction the next time we do it. I think that's also something that's really important to me. And then the final thing that is like sweat the small stuff. Like often like the big kind of programs that you see or the big campaigns are the result of lots and lots of little decisions or lots of little details. Like you have to really sweat each one of those details to ensure you get the right outcome. So really, pushing people to sweat the small stuff.
How do you balance? So you're a big organisation. You're number one. You're sweating the small stuff, but you've got lots of competitors nipping at your heels. Like, how do you move quick enough and make the odd mistake without sort of getting buried in kind of perfectionism? Because presumably, you want everything to be perfect, as we all do as marketers. But I know right from small companies to big, there is this thing where, you want everything to be perfect, and then that slows you down. And like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's actually one that the industry is challenged with right now because, as marketers, you often want things to be pixel perfect and look great before you put them out to the world. And actually, you need to be comfortable at actually putting stuff out that might not be pixel perfect, but you'll get very quick feedback and you can adjust and be nimble. And one of the challenges that we faced as a marketing organization, or I should say as a performance marketing organization, was we would typically rely on our kind of creative studio team to produce all of our content and assets. And because the demands have like gone through the roof in terms of the amount of content you need to keep those platforms optimized, there was frustration on all sides because the studio team couldn't keep up with those demands. The performance marketing team couldn't produce the results they wanted because they didn't have as much variations of the assets that they needed, and like something had to change. And so, we introduced, what we call now Gen Studio for performance marketing, which was really, it started out actually back when Adobe introduced Firefly back in early 2023, which was, our AI image generation tool, which is obviously designed to be commercially safe from the outset. And the minute we introduced that, like those teams were like, okay, how do we use this? Like there were so many ideas in which we could use this to help our marketing and to help unlock some of the challenges we faced. It was like, okay, let's start with two business challenges we have to solve for. One was we need more content so we can do more quicker testing and more variations to testing. And second thing was to unblock the bottlenecks we saw with our studio team. So we had like two use cases that we wanted to address. Then it was like, okay, how do we get a team together that's going to try and play around with the technology to try and address these challenges? And this first group together, we actually called it Project Platypus, because the reason we called it Project Platypus is because we weren't quite sure what it was.
Nice.
But basically, it was a mixture of like there were some people from the studio team, there was some performance marketers, and they came together and they played around. And actually, the results that they saw in terms of the output was like really amazing. Like wow, this is incredible. Like we just need to scale this to more teams. We opened it out to more people, and then suddenly it's like the results weren't as good. And what we discovered when we actually looked at the people that had joined that first like pilot platypus pilot, that you had the people from the studio team or the individuals from the studio side had a real deep appreciation of performance marketing, and the people on the performance marketing side had like a photography side hustle. So they had an appreciation for the aesthetics and the creativity. When you started to broaden it out, actually you had people who were sort of struggling on both sides. So that's when we recognised, okay, we need to have some more structure around this, more sort of frameworks and guardrails built into the tool, so that the performance marketers could create content themselves within the brand kind of guardrails. And so the creative team were happy that what was going to be put out to the world would be on brand, and the performance marketers could suddenly create content. Like they could create, their own content and not have to get to the back of a queue of a studio team. And so we've seen some really great success rolling that out across the organisation. The teams can now produce culturalised assets quickly at scale, because the amount of content you need is astronomical. Yeah. If you for Adobe and for a lot, if you just times the number of products by the number of markets, by the number of channels, by the number of variation, you get very quickly you get to hundreds of thousands of assets that you need, and then you get told by the platforms that 3 variations isn't enough. You need 10 if you really want to optimize the algorithm. Yeah. I was like, oh God. So we have to enable the teams to be able to produce what they need to be successful.
I love that, but you've spoken about it throughout, but the fact that you recognize these problems within your own organization, you mentioned earlier, this is exactly the type of thing you feed back into the product. And so it's so fantastic to sort of know that you relate in a way, because I think there'll be people who are just feels quite seen by everything you just sort of spoken through. So thank you as well for giving the example as well, because that's wicked. I'm a history buff, and so I'm thinking some World War II weird stuff, sort of those really creative projects. It felt like that, with those weird names. That's a very big tangent there. So you've spoken about creating a culture about optimism, and you used the word fear as well in your previous answer, in reducing fear. And you also spoke about looking around the corner in terms of what's coming up. And inevitably the elephant in the room when we sort of combine all of those thoughts is AI and how we think about it. So, I've actually been really impressed over the past sort of day when I've been interacting with various members of your team that they really seem to be on the side of the creative, which is brilliant. But how do you keep things responsible and ethical when we sort of head into this next generation of marketers using AI in lots of different ways? And that can be from the creator side, that can be from the marketer side. I'd just be really curious because there's a lot going on. But unchecked, then it can go into all sorts of different directions. So how do you inject that sort of responsibility?
You're right. I think you mentioned a couple of words, but accountability, responsibility, and transparency are 3 words that have driven our entire approach to AI. And we think about it both from a product perspective, but also the wider societal challenges that we face. And I think that when I mentioned it earlier, when we released Firefly in 2023, it was designed to be commercially safe. It's trained only on licensed content in Adobe stock. So we took a very ethical approach to AI, and I think that's been really valued by the creative community. There's also I see a couple of kind of stories here. Firstly, in terms of you're kind of your creative professional who are using our tools Adobe's tools day in, day out. For us, or for them, it's the most precious thing is time. Right? There's never enough time to do the type of work they want to do, and I think what our tools, our AI is allowing them to do is kind of eliminate those kind of tedious time tasks that suck up a lot of their time, and if we can eliminate those tasks and allow them to spend more time on where they can make a real impact on the world, whether through storytelling, emotive campaigns, and creative. And so by building our AI tools into their products they use day in, day out, and into the workflows they use day in, day out, that's where you really make a difference. It's part of their existing workflows. It's just making those workflows more effective and eliminating those tedious tasks. I think for the broader kind of creator, or even like the business professional, or anyone who wants to kind of create visual communication, and certainly speaking for myself, who fits in that category, the scariest thing is the blank page. Yeah. Like that's what most people have fear about, is that where do I start? Like, where do I start? And so again, like with what tools like Firefly allow is, it gives you that, it kind of eliminates that blank page and gives you a starting point from which you can then iterate. So I think there's and knowing that you're doing it with a commercially safe tool is important for obviously for brands who are very worried about violating copyright and IP infringement. We don't have to worry about that when they partner with Adobe. And then we've also invested heavily in what we call content credentials. So we firmly believe that as a consumer, if you walk into a supermarket, you have every right to know what's inside your food, right? And so you could turn the back of the packet and you can see the full list of the ingredients. Well, that's what we've built for from a digital perspective or content perspective. Now with content credentials, you have basically a nutrition label for your assets. You can see how it was created, who created it, when it was created, whether it was touched by AI or not. And more recently, we released a free content authenticity app, which allows people to go in there and then decide if they want to tag their asset with content credentials, but also state if they don't want their content to be used in training the AI models. So we've got thousands of organisations have signed up to the Content Authenticity Initiative, and I think that's what consumers are looking for, is that transparency over content, and creators, to protect the creator.
It sounds like you're kind of like leading. You're ahead of the platforms in a way, because recently uploading videos to YouTube, there's that button that says, has this been altered by AI? Well, actually, you're already doing the thing that's going to authenticate that, and I should imagine at some point that'll automatically pick up whether it's got those credentials in there, and that's...
Yeah, and we're partnering with a lot of the platforms as well. A lot of them have come on board and signed up to the Content Authenticity Initiative, as well as a lot of the media houses and publications. So it's great to see that happening, and that's going to be so important to build that point around trust and creative protection.
And I love the fact that you mentioned about storytelling and creativity, and it's the tasks that take, the boring tasks. I think about like the background remover thing. Like, I know he's on all platforms, but you kind of go, I think whenever I create a YouTube thumbnail, which I'll probably do with this, it'll be a case of, I don't want the background in, click, done, move on kind of thing. Well, years ago, you'd be like click, 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 trying to, work your way around, and nobody wants to be doing that. But actually, we do want to be telling stories, and that gives us more. It gives us more sort of breadth to be doing like interesting stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have been fabulous today. I have only one question remaining, and it's a big one. It's so when will Arsenal next win the Premier League?
Well, I'm obviously going to say next season if we sign a striker. I'm hoping that the Arsenal women's team win the WSL as well. For a level double that way would be nice.
Love that. Well, wishing you all the best in that endeavour.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. You've been wonderful. So thank you for spending some time with us. It's really appreciated.